The OSG Sports app is up and running on your Android or iPhone. All you got to do, install the OSG Sports app and listen to our podcast from college football, soccer. What are you waiting for? Let's get this done. Get the OSG Sports app today.
What makes college football special? It's the rivalries and trophy games. From the Monon bell to the $5 bits of broken chair. It's college football's rivalries and trophy games. Here's your host, John Nelson and John Wilkerson.
Tommy Palmer thanks. We are glad you're listening to this podcast on our host site Spreaker or on Spotify, Stitcher Radio, SoundCloud, YouTube, or on the OSG Sports app on your Apple or Android device. This week, Utah State and Wyoming play for a rifle, and it's a big game in the Mountain Division of the Mountain West. Phil Canner chats with Jason Turner from the Logan Herald-Journal about this rivalry. It's one of the classic trophy games in all divisions of college football. So special that it has its own ballad.
Further down the line, the Cavemen came from Wabash and the Tigers from DePauw. Since 1890, they have played the last game every fall.
Saturday in Greencastle, Indiana, Wabash College and DePauw meet for the 126th time in the Monon Bell Classic. John Nelson has former Wabash player and current football analyst Steve Hoffman to describe what makes this game and this rivalry and this trophy so special. Over in Arkansas, it's the 93rd Battle of the Ravine between Henderson State and Ouachita Baptist. Now, Henderson State will literally dress in their own locker room and walk across the street to O.B.U. Stadium on Saturday. Later, the voice of the Ouachita Baptist Tigers, Rex Nelson, shares other unique qualities of the Battle of the Ravine. And in Georgia, West Georgia and Valdosta State go at it in the Battle of the Peach Basket. The voice of the Valdosta Blazers, Spencer Van Horn, will join John Nelson. We begin with the Deep South's oldest rivalry. Georgia and Auburn meet for the 124th time Saturday at 3:30 Eastern at Jordan-Hare Stadium. If the Bulldogs win, not only will it be their third win in a row over the Tigers, it would clinch the SEC East title for the Bulldogs for the third time in a row. And joining me now on the line to talk about the Deep South's oldest rivalry is Bill Shanks from the Bill Shanks Show on the superstations.com. And Bill, tell me why this rivalry is so special.
Well, look, Auburn's right on the other side of the Chattahoochee River, right on the Georgia-Alabama border. So, you know, I've always said, John, that people in the side of the state of Georgia who are not able to get into UGA have to go to Auburn. That's one reason. Well, and truthfully, I mean, seriously, Georgia, it's not well, that is an exaggeration, but the fact is Georgia's hard to get into now. And I know a lot of people from middle Georgia who, when they can't get into UGA out of high school, they turn to Auburn. And, you know, there's some people that are a lot closer to Auburn than they are to Athens. And therefore, you know, people to the west of me, west of I-75, have a good chance of being Auburn fans because they may have grown up with Columbus television and seen all the coverage or whatever or that. And, you know, you have the crossover of the Pat Dye, Vince Dooley storylines of them, you know, going to coach for the opposite school and after getting their education at the original school. So, you know, there's that, the proximity. It's a great rivalry. It makes me wish that Georgia and Clemson had the same thing, considering the same situation, really, in northeast Georgia. But it's and you know, I guarantee you, there's probably more in my listening area. There may be more Auburn fans who listen to Georgia Tech fans, and that's why I poke at them a lot. But I mean, there's just a lot of people from our area who have children who go to Auburn or who have been to Auburn. I have a couple of friends who are UGA grads who married down and married someone from Auburn. So anyway, it's just that's kind of the tie-in there.
Several years ago, I had a little one-on-one with Vince Dooley, and we were talking about the rivalry between Georgia and Auburn. Of course, he has, as does Pat Dye, the unique perspective of, you know, Dooley played for Auburn but coached at Georgia. Pat Dye was opposite, played at Georgia and coached at Auburn. But anyway,
Right.
with Coach Dooley, he summed up the Auburn-Georgia rivalry as, think of it as feuding cousins. Is that an accurate description?
Yeah, John, I think that's an accurate description. It's just so tied in together with geography, and I know some people who have relatives in Alabama who are not Alabama fans; they're Auburn fans, and I've got a cousin who's an Auburn fan, and it's just compared to Florida, John. Florida's in Gainesville, and that's further away from Atlanta, so it's further away from the population base. Auburn's right down I-85, an hour and a half away. And so the proximity has a lot to do with it too, and the fact that it's just easier to have the Auburn information. But I think as much as anything, you have family or friends that went there, but it's the games. It's the fact that these games are always so tight, and there were decades where Georgia, Florida, for example, were not very interesting because Georgia either had the advantage or Florida had the advantage. And now you've got, obviously, a situation with Auburn where just about every year the games are so engaging. But I will point out, John, that Georgia's won 11 out of the last 14.
Well, that is true. That's a fact. And this rivalry, Bill, started in 1892 on February 20th in Piedmont Park. I'm just kind of imagining me walking in Midtown Atlanta today and by Piedmont Park and seeing Georgia and Auburn play. That would be kind of odd. But there's some odds and ends about this rivalry that are kind of unique. The fact that they played at Piedmont Park in 1892, the fact that this game was a neutral site game for many years in Columbus, Georgia, up until 1958, and then it went home and home. And so there's some very unique things about this rivalry that make it kind of special.
There's no doubt, and again, I think what kind of catapulted it to a new level as far as rivalries are concerned is the fact for a decade, John, Georgia had an Auburn grad coaching them against Auburn at the same time that a Georgia grad was coaching Auburn against his alma mater. I think that more than anything.
Vince Dooley, Pat Dye.
Right. Vince Dooley for Georgia and Pat Dye for Auburn. And because Pat Dye was a big part of Georgia's offensive line back in the day and was a big name in Georgia football. And then all of a sudden he goes and he coaches for Coach Bryant, and then he coaches for, at Auburn, gets the Auburn job. And that escalated it because that was at the same time, John, when recruiting was getting really popular and people started paying attention to recruiting. And Pat Dye would come over into the western part of the state of Georgia, which, of course, was closer to Auburn, Alabama, than to Athens, Georgia, and, quote-unquote, steal players. And that made Georgia people dislike Coach Dye. And, Vince Dooley was supposed to get that job. You may remember that after Georgia won the national championship in 1980, it was Vince Dooley who was supposedly going to Auburn to get that gig, and then he decided after winning the national championship to stay at UGA, and that changed things for the 80s and allowed that Dye and Dooley rivalry to take this whole rivalry to a whole nother level. So I think that was something that made it so just escalate in terms of what the fans on both sides thought about it, to have one of your guys coach the other guy, and at the same time, one of their guys coach you. So it was. I think that was a big part of how this got to a certain little bit. But I'm telling you, I've got two friends. I've got a little Bulldog club. We go to lunch every week and we talk Bulldog football. We're all either grads or longtime fans, and two of those guys hate Auburn with a passion. I mean, hate Auburn worse than I hate the Saints, worse than I hate it. And, Georgia fans are split, John, because Georgia fans, some of them may hate Tennessee like I do. Some may hate Florida. Some may hate Georgia Tech if they're really old. But there's a lot of people who can't stand Auburn. And so two of my guys, they just despise Auburn. And the crazy thing is they share a good friend who is an Auburn guy and who's a loudmouth Auburn guy. And I'm like, well, that's why you hate him so bad, because this guy runs his mouth about the rivalry, even though, I keep on telling them to tell him that it's really not a rivalry if Auburn can't win more than 3 times in 14 years, but they won't listen to me. But that it's that kind of relationship that a lot of people have with friends of theirs. And I'll be honest with you, on my show, I know, as I said earlier, that there are a ton of Auburn people in this area, in my listening area, and I pick at them. I do, and I have fun with it. I have fun with it. And I'll say, for example, things like, all right, our phone number is 478-646-ESPN, and for you Auburn people who don't know there are numbers and letters on the phone, that's 3776, and that just pisses them off no matter what. So I think it's that back and forth that sometimes we may have with our feuding cousins that kind of represents what Coach Dooley was saying to you.
We're talking to Bill Shanks from the Bill Shanks Show on the superstations.com, talking to the Auburn-Georgia rivalry, which Bill is very passionate about. And I want to talk to you about a few games. The one that comes to mind, there's a few that come to mind actually. The 96 game that went over, the first SEC overtime game. I remember that game. Georgia pulls it off, and it was one of the classics in the rivalry.
It was unbelievable. It was Jim Donnan's first year, if you remember, John, and to have that overtime, and they took Coach Donnan off the field, and there's a great Georgia video with Larry Munson doing the play-by-play of that game, where he's providing the play-by-play, and they're kind of watching Munson, and it was great. It was an unbelievable game, just back and forth, and I think we got a picture that if that was what overtime football was going to be about, we were going to be in for a treat, and it was really, really cool, and a great win for Coach Don. He still talks about that today as one of the top wins of his 5 years at Georgia because of just how grand a game it was.
And, of course, 2002, David Green's prayer to the back of the end zone to Michael Johnson, and Georgia gets it done.
It was an unbelievable win, and sidebar story about me, I was actually doing an Atlanta Hawks TV show at the time, and was watching the game on CBS when I was at the game pregame, and there was not very many people in the Phillips Arena at the time, and I kind of let out a little scream when he caught that ball at the back of the end zone, and Pete Babcock looked at me like he was going to kill me, and then they started laughing because they knew what was going on because it was the Georgia Auburn weekend, and that was another tremendous call by Larry Munson, of course, and let me say this, John, probably the best call I think Larry Munson ever did was in the 1982 game. That was the sugar falling out of the sky broadcast, if you may remember, and that was so good. If you go listen to the 4-minute clip of those plays leading up to that final play when Lonnie Sanchez and Lonnie, what was his name? Jeff Sanchez and Lonnie something got up in the air. That was about the best. If you want a young man who wants to be a play-by-play man to listen to how it's done, listen to that tape because Munson was perfect on that whole series of just rooting his team on and describing the action in grand detail. But that 2002 game was special in that way too. That's
the famous "Hunker Down Now, Dogs," right?
Yep, hunker down, dogs, one more time. Yep, and look at the sugar falling out of the sky. It was. I mean, his call was just gives me chills listening to it.
And of course, in 2013, there was the prayer of Jordan Air, where Ricardo Lewis catches the miracle Hail Mary to get it done for Auburn in that series. Probably not one of your better memories, Bill, knowing that you're on the Georgia side of things, but still, it was kind of a classic ending.
Well, and again, this is another reason why this game and this series and rivalry is special. Fans for both sides are going to have stories about where they were when X happened, just like I was telling you about 2002. In that game, I was actually in the room I'm in right now, which is in my basement of my house, my sports room, and I had one of my Georgia friends with me, and he still tells the story to this day, because I actually did almost like a Hollywood collapse on my knees. I was literally in shock, as all Georgia fans were from that. And my friend Frank says, I thought Bill had passed out, but he just fell on his knees, because I don't think he knew what to say. And I don't think either one of us had anything to say for like 2.5 minutes. We were just in literal shock at what had just happened. And yeah, so that's not a very good memory for Georgia at all.
And, of course, 2 years ago, they met twice in 1 year, Auburn winning the regular season game. But when it counted for a championship, it was Georgia that won it in the SEC championship game. That's the first time that's ever happened in the series, where they met twice, kind of similar to what happened to last year with Oklahoma, Texas. So as a fans for both sides, what's it like when you play a rival like that twice in, gosh, it was like maybe a 4 or 5 week period?
Well, it played out exactly how Georgia needed it to play out. I mean, that Auburn loss over there obviously kicked him into a different gear. And, John, I have the feeling, is my belief, that it's almost unrealistic for a team to be perfect for a season. We may have 2 this year with LSU and Clemson, and perhaps 3 with Ohio State. That's obviously very possible. But I think on most years it's very difficult to expect a team to be perfect. And Georgia had a great team that year, obviously, but they went over to Auburn and they absolutely wet the bed. They were awful that day in the regular season game. And that propelled them, however, to kick it into a whole nother level, to where when they met again, they dominated. And they truly just learned from everything they did wrong in that game in Auburn, and came back and just manhandled the line of scrimmage with Auburn in that championship game. And it could not have played out better, really. It could not have. And I think if you ask any Georgia player from that 2017 team, they'll tell you that loss at Auburn was what really drove them to get to within an eyelash of the national championship. You can't get much closer than they were, obviously, in overtime against Alabama. And it was a phenomenal turn of events. But, we knew after the loss to Auburn over there, well, they're going to have to learn from what they did wrong, come back out and get ticked off, and realize what's ahead for them if they win this championship game. And that's exactly what they did.
So they meet on Saturday in Auburn. How do you see this year's game being played out? Because you got 2 really good defenses going at each other.
Well, it's a tremendous matchup, John. As always, it's a great matchup. It is something that, again, we are so used to in this series. The more I studied about the game to try to prepare for this week and the discussion that we'll have on our show, the more I felt good about Georgia's chances. But that's not saying that this is not going to be a tremendous challenge for the Bulldogs, and that it's not going to be a tough game. And I don't expect either team to separate themselves. I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be able to play out kind of like the Georgia-Florida game was. Georgia hopes to have, I think, an early lead and not have to come from behind on the road, which is never a good thing. And I could see the score being very similar, 24-17, something like that, to where because, Auburn's not let anybody score above 24 this year. So it's not like the Georgia offense is going to be out of control and score 30 or 40 on Auburn. I don't think that's going to happen. But I don't think Auburn's got the offense to give Georgia a lot of trouble either. I think Georgia's defense is just playing at such a high level right now, and it's amazing to see. And that probably is why they were put in that 4th spot on Tuesday night instead of Alabama, I think, because of the 3 shutouts they've gotten. I know 2 of those shutouts were against SEC East teams who may not look very good, with Missouri and Kentucky, but they still shut them out. And so I think with their questions about Auburn's running game, with them having a freshman quarterback, Georgia's defense has got to control this football game, and if they can do that, they're going to win.
Okay, Bill, tell us where we can hear you.
TheSuperstations.com. We're on every weekday afternoon from 3 until 7. All over Middle Georgia, 93.1 in Macon, 105.9 in Warner Robins, and also thesuperstations.com all over the globe.
And, Bill, we appreciate you joining the show and dropping some knowledge about the Auburn-Georgia rivalry.
Sorry for my dog, Lucy, to join in the discussion, but she can't wait for the game either, John.
Well, that's great. And you know, Bill, I'm sure there's people out there that are going to be looking for tickets. And I'm sure there's not very many available, but if they go to SeatGiant.com, they may be able to find that, because if you do and type SDH on the checkout, it helps you and it helps us. That's SeatGiant.com. When we come back, we're going to go out west. Utah State and Wyoming, they play for a firearm. That's next.
Welcome back to the Rivalry and Trophy Game Show, everybody. I'm OSC Phil, and we have an interview here today with Jason Turner from the Logan Herald-Journal. Jason covers Utah State football, and we're talking the Bridger Rifle. Jason, I know the Bridger Rifle is a relatively new trophy, but are you able to explain a little bit to our listeners here what we're talking about?
A little bit. There was a famous trapper back in the 1800s named Jim Bridger. He spent a lot of time in the Cat, which is where Logan is, and also just the Intermountain area, so Wyoming, Utah, Idaho, and so that's where the name is derived from.
And if the trophy itself's only been around, I guess this is going on the 6th year, how combative, intense, serious is this in terms of a rivalry for the season?
I think they're definitely rivals. The games have, since Utah State joined the Mountain West, the games, other than a couple of the games, have been really close, hard-fought for sure. Wyoming's very, very tough-minded team, and so very rarely, even when Utah State was really good last season, the Aggies were a bit fortunate to win that game. Wyoming just knows how to play tough-minded football and always makes for close games, seems like.
How is Utah State sitting in the Mountain West this season? Where are they at as we're getting kind of late in the season?
They're actually sitting as up and down as their season's been, they're actually sitting pretty well. You know, they get Wyoming, they're at 4-1 in the Mountain Division. Boise State is undefeated at, I want to say 5-0. They're 4-0 or 5-0. Air Force and Utah State are 4-1. Obviously, Air Force would have the tiebreaker over Utah State. Wyoming's 3-2. But the Aggies get to host Wyoming this week and then Boise State the next week. So it's a decent setup for them. In order for them to win a three-way tiebreaker, I think Air Force is going to have to lose another game, but they still have Wyoming to play. So, considering how up and down of a season it's been, the Aggies are still right in the thick of things.
And it sets them up pretty well for a bowl game, too, here. A win would get them to that 6th win.
Yeah, I think if they beat Wyoming, they close out the season at New Mexico. New Mexico struggled this year. The Aggies will definitely be pretty heavy favorites in that game. If they beat Wyoming, they're going to at least get the 7 wins, in my opinion, and that'll set them up very well for another bowl game.
Considering the expectations coming into the season with Jordan Love at quarterback and everything else, would that be what would qualify as a successful season up there?
I think so. Personally think so. I think some fans, based on what happened last season, based on the numbers that Jordan Love put up last season, I think maybe they were expecting a little bit more. But, when you really break it down, the Aggies lost almost their entire offensive line last year. They lost some really, really good skill position guys, Jalen Green, Ronquavian Tarver, Dax Raymond, Aaron Vaughn. These are guys who had really nice seasons last year, so it was kind of an unproven cast for the most part at the skill positions, with the exception of Gerald Bright, who was basically starter number 2 at tailback for the Aggies last year. So, I think when you consider who they lost, I would consider this a success. Obviously, Jordan's thrown too many interceptions this year. He's I don't think the decision making's quite been as good. I mean, there's no question it hasn't been as good as last year, but a lot of that has to do with not having the same skill guys, losing 4 starters on the offensive line, plus the schedule's been a lot more difficult this year. So all those things factor into it.
I got to ask this question. It's been the weather here in the east has kind of turned very cold and windy. What's the weather expected to be out there this weekend for the game at Maverick Stadium?
I think it's actually supposed to be pretty darn good for a mid-November day in Cache Valley. I think it's supposed to be around 50. If that's the case,
wow.
Thank your lucky stars. That's as good of weather as you're getting here.
Wow.
Afternoon game does help.
I guess kind of we'll wrap things up here a little bit with how is the turnout for the games? Is this a game where the student section's going to be there, the herd's going to be there, and they're going to be really loud and into this game? Or is it just another conference game in terms of that respect?
I hope so. The student section has been pretty good this year. Obviously, they came out in droves for the BYU game a couple of weeks ago, but that's always been the case. It's decades and decades that's been the case. But this is a meaningful game. The Aggies are 4-1, have a chance to have a huge game against Boise State next week if they can get this win. So, especially, there's no holidays going on. The weather's supposed to be very nice for this time of the year. I would suspect we're going to have a good student turnout on Saturday.
Look forward to seeing the results, seeing how the game comes out. Jason Turner, thank you for joining us here on the Rivalry and Trophy Game shows. I'm going to, at this point, toss it back to the guys in the studio. We'll be back with more of the Rivalries and Trophy Game show coming up right back after this.
Hey, what's going on, y'all? This is Rock at the What's Up Falcons podcast, and I'm joined with my boys. My boys in the house. Where you at?
Yeah. What up?
Oh, gee, and we have Q, and we have Hoop in the house.
Q's here, the most beloved guy in all of sports entertainment.
Indeed. Hey, y'all, we want to thank everyone for listening to us, and if you want to listen to some great Falcons information, check us out on the What's Up Falcons podcast. Right, fellas?
Right. Sir. Hey, we here every week, baby.
We keeping it real, so check us out. I'm there on Twitter. Holla. Peace.
Subscribe to the What's Up Falcons podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud. Listen to the What's Up Falcons podcast at whatsupfalcons.com.
Long before the cannonball traveled through her towns, the state of Indiana owned a jewel of the crown. The train they called the Monon, the stories they still tell, the cavemen and the tigers playing for her bell. It rode like a masthead on Engine 99, Crawfordsville to Greencastle and further down the line. The cavemen came from Wabash and the tigers from DePauw. Since 1890 they have played the last game every fall. Many years they played for pride, oh, the stories they could tell. Then in 32 the Monon train gave up her precious bell. They said, here, take this symbol of smoke and fire and grit, and give it to the winner, a symbol not to quit. Ring the bell for Wabash, ring for old DePauw, ring the bell for victory in the last game of the fall. Ring the bell for Wabash, ring for old DePauw, ring the bell for victory in the last game every fall.
Welcome back to the OSG on CFB, Trophy Games and Rivalries. And now it is time to catch up with, Steve, when we were having our meetings about rivalries and trophy games, this one was thrown at us from the outside. It's like, no, you have to do Monon Bell. And for those not familiar with it, it's DePauw and Wabash in Indiana this weekend. Steve Hoffman, Director of Alumni and Parent Relations for Wabash College. You've got a couple of different ways that you've been a part of this. Thanks for hanging out with us for the education this week.
Always thrilled to talk about the Monon Bell game, John. I was a player in the rivalry, and then I coached here at Wabash for 6 years in the mid-'90s, and for the last 15, 20 years, I've been a broadcaster for the Wabash radio stations covering our Wabash football games, and then currently Wabash TV, which live streams them. So, been to a few of these. I've been part of or at 39 consecutive.
Oh, wow.
From when I arrived as a freshman in 1981. I was a little pimply-faced kid on the football team, so I haven't missed one since.
What does this rivalry mean to that particular section of Indiana and to college football, you think?
Let me start with the second part of that. With to college football, I think this is the kind of the heart of what college football should be and what a college football rivalry should be. And I say that because Wabash College and DePauw University are both Division III schools, and meaning that neither of us provide athletic scholarships. So you have kids on the field playing who are at their respective schools for the academics, and also being part of a successful football program helps as well. But these are kids they're not going to go in the NFL, although we did have Wabash had a player, Pete Metzlars, in the NFL for 18 years, Wabash college graduate. But that's not really what their goal is. And so for college football, this is kind of the essence of a college student playing a sport. They're not out there because they have to be out there practicing every day because they're on a scholarship. They're out there because that's where they want to be at that particular day and time. And so it really kind of adds a natural thing to this rivalry. And then what does it mean to the schools? It is just so interwoven into being a Wabash man that as soon as you come, in fact, before that, as you're getting recruited, and the reason I say Wabash man, if the listeners don't know, Wabash College is an all-male liberal arts college in Crawfordsville, Indiana, of about 900 students.
Mm-hmm.
DePauw University is co-ed and a liberal arts college of about 2,400 students. So there's quite a big difference in the schools just with that respect. But as you're getting recruited to come here, either as a player or any student, you start hearing about the Monon Bell rivalry. And you start thinking about it, and as soon as you're here, you're talking about beating DePauw in November, beat DePauw, and there's a sign up in the locker room as the team exits the locker room, what have you done today to beat DePauw? And so that's there constantly. So you asked me what it meant to Central Indiana. It's greater than that, because I think what this rivalry does is the high percentage. I don't know if many rivalries would beat the number of our alumni who care about this game. There are these big rivalries, Michigan, Ohio State, Notre Dame, USC, LSU, Alabama. They draw fans from all around the country. But the percentage of our alumni who care about who wins this game and know that this week that we're in right now is Bell Week is extremely high. And so you have an environment at the game, but you have an environment nationwide of people following this game. We have over 60 telecast parties around the country. Most of those are with DePauw alumni in the specific area, but not all of them. And so it's just really widespread and really the essence of what college football is and what a college football rivalry is all about.
And there's a song that's attached to the Monon Bell game too?
There was a song written in the early 80s called The Ballad of the Monon Bell, and interestingly enough, they put the song to a video in the early 80s, and most of it was highlights from the 1984 Monon Bell game, fortunately, of which I was quarterback of the Wabash College team in the first rendition of the ballad. When I say the first rendition, is that song has not changed, but they've kind of updated they've kind of updated the game footage, if you will, for that song. There are 3 or 4 different versions out there over the years. It was written by a DePauw alumnus, and someone from DePauw could answer more specifically, but there was a band called the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band.
Oh, yeah.
Is my understanding, and a DePauw alumnus was maybe one of the leads in that, and he wrote the Ballad of the Monon Bell in the early 80s. So it's been around a little while.
When it comes to game day, what's game day like?
Again, it goes back to the entire, when you're a player here, the entire campus is it feels like every single student, I know that's not quite the case, but it feels like it's pretty true, cares about the Bell game and is planning to go to the Monon Bell game, and if they can't, they pay attention to what's going on. Throughout the week, at least here at Wabash, there's a tradition that the freshmen, because there's this bell stealing that tends to try to go on,
I'm
right?
shocked.
The Monon
Something
Bell.
like that would happen.
Yeah, you're what? You're shocked?
I'm
I know.
shocked.
Isn't that? Yeah, exactly. So look, these schools are 30 miles apart. And the Monon Bell, this rivalry is one of the oldest in the country, and the Monon Bell is a big train bell that came off the locomotive that used to travel the Monon Railroad, which connects Crawfordsville and Greencastle and other places. But we're only 30 miles apart. So one of the traditions here, to give you an idea of how much it seeps into the culture of Wabash, one of the traditions here are freshmen during Bell Week, we guard the campus, right, as freshmen. I did it. Others did it. So as a fraternity person, we had one night, along with another fraternity or two, let's say it was Tuesday night, where we were responsible for guarding the campus. What does that mean? Well, obviously it means not letting anyone steal the bell, because the bell is sitting out in the open in front of the chapel right now, because it's being guarded by students all week, 24/7. And so I remember my time was like, my slot was like, 1 to 4 a.m. I was supposed to be out there. So from 1 to 4, I was with other guys. We were walking around the campus. We were making sure the bell was secure. People always stayed with the bell, but we also wanted to make sure no one from DePauw came up and marked on anything or spray painted anything or, put their initials anywhere. And so we guarded the campus. Students still do that today, throughout the entire week. We ring when we have the bell, which we've been fortunate enough to have it quite a bit lately. We ring the bell 24/7 within reason. I shouldn't say 24/7. We ring it as long as it makes sense to ring it. So we will not ring it during class time because it's a small campus. The buildings are pretty close together. We will not ring it after like 11 p.m. maybe it's 10 p.m. We have something called the gentleman's rule here, right? So we're trying to follow the gentleman's rule with the neighborhood. So it'll be ringing. I'll walk outside over my lunch hour and it's ringing. I came to work and it's ringing. I will leave work, after the last class ends. Today's a Wednesday. Last class ends at 3:50. It'll start ringing and it'll just ring all evening. So somebody is responsible for keeping that going.
All right.
My point in giving you these traditions,
hey, that's what they're here for,
are that it seeps into the fabric of Wabash. If you're a Wabash student, you know about the bell and you care about the bell.
My last question for you, and thanks for giving us the education this week on Trophy Games and Rivalries. What kind of a game are you expecting this year? Because I imagine you're going to be in the booth for this one. What kind of a game are you expecting?
Yeah, I will be in the booth. It's broadcast by Fox Sports this year. Fox Sports Midwest and Fox Sports Indiana, and then on the Fox Sports Go app. That sounded like a plug.
That's what I was going to say. That was how we were going to wrap, was give the plug for the whole thing, but go ahead, yeah.
I'll wrap early. So I will be in the booth. So Wabash has won, and I'm embarrassed I don't know this, maybe 8 of the last 9 Monon Bell games, which is really unusual in this rivalry. Give you a sense of how close this rivalry is over the history. When I was coaching here, I coached in the 100th rivalry game, and going into the 100th game, the series was 45, 45, and 9 ties.
Oh, wow.
And the 99th game was a tie. So going into the 100th game, the series was completely tied, and the year before was a tie game, back when you could tie in college football. So it's just been like that. Now, both teams over the history have had streaks. We're in a streak right now of being fortunate. But the last 3 years have been really close. We've won 2 of the last 3. I think either team is looking to run the football. Both offenses are pretty pretty varied, pretty balanced, I should say. DePauw likes to have their quarterbacks who run a lot with their offense. We have a quarterback who is able to run right now, a freshman, Liam Thompson. But both teams need to set up their offense and set up the rest of their offense by running the football successfully. So I'm going to say you take turnovers out of it. Those are always a big deal in kicking game stuff. But the team who has the most rushing yards is going to win this football game.
All right, so it's on the Fox family of networks, Fox Sports Midwest, Fox Sports Go app. What else am I missing?
Fox Sports Indiana.
Okay, Fox Sports Indiana. And
Yes.
On the radio side, what's the radio call, and how do folks keep a listen on everything, not just Monon Bell, but everything that goes on at Wabash all season long?
All season long, they should check. If they want to find it on the radio, I'm embarrassed I don't have any call numbers to throw out to you right now. If they're in central Indiana or in Crawfordsville, I would recommend 91.3, the college's radio station, or 103.9. But I think if you go to the Wabash College website or DePauw's Monon Bell website, you're going to find a way to listen to it through audio.
Well, looking forward to it, and thanks for the education, Steve. Steve Hoffman, Director of Alumni and Parent Relations, Wabash College, played in it, coached in it, calling it from the booth this weekend. Thanks for the education, and thanks for hanging out with us here on the OSG on CFB to break down Monon Bell.
Hey, look, I appreciate you giving some airtime to the Monon Bell rivalry. I'm biased and partial, but it's one of the best college football rivalries in the country.
Let's see. I have seen Ken a bunch of different job titles, ranging from special advisor to the president to DePauw's #1 fan. I think the business card's pretty full for you here when it comes to talking about DePauw.
Well, and there's no room anymore. I'd say handyman. Handyman works. But, yeah, it's a great rivalry, and I'm like a kid on Christmas morning, the day of the game. I literally can't sleep, get up about 4. It's like, you run downstairs to see if Santa's been there. And it's really a thrilling thing.
And class of 82, full disclosure.
Yes.
And we're going to catch up with you on this half of the Monon Bell. And first thing, we talked to Steve Hoffman over on the Wabash side of things. Mm-hmm. And we also found out that there's a song, there's a ballad.
Yeah. Yes, it was created in 1985. Actually, the person that had my job, who I knew when I was a student, Pat Aikman, who graduated in 1957 and later was in charge of the Indiana High School All-Star Game. He decided we needed a song, and ironically, it was the person that had my job in 1932 that decided we needed a trophy, but that's another story. And Pat reached out to Jimmy Ibbotson, who is actually, I believe he started with Darrell Lindquist, who died recently, class of 68 or 69, and Nancy Ford Charles. Nancy, I think it's class of 57. Nancy had written the Broadway musical with Gretchen Cryer, I'm Getting My Act Together and Putting It on the Road. Anyway,
oh, wow.
Darrell wrote the lyrics. He sent them on to Nancy. Nancy, I found a tape, an unlabeled cassette tape like 10 years ago of her sitting in her Manhattan apartment playing this song for the first time on piano. And it's a very different arrangement than what Jimmy Ibbotson, who was in the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, came up with in 1985. But they recorded that about a month before the game in 85, and it was used throughout the 80s. When I came back to DePauw after working in TV news in 2001, it had kind of been relegated to a closet, and I got it back out, brushed it off, found the master, and the great thing is, the week of the game, you literally walk across campus and you hear it blaring from the fraternity house. It's almost like brown sugar or something. When we were in college, it's everywhere, and it really it does add luster to the rivalry.
And at the same time, there's protecting the bell to make sure that it is not taken from one campus to another, and it's not dated and stuff like that. So this is truly a treasured trophy.
It is, John. We haven't had that problem for a while, sadly, but no, it is a pretty cool thing. And I guess, the flip side of it is when you've only had the bell one time in 9 years, which is where we are right now. When we won in 2016, you got to think about it. We hadn't had the bell on campus since we lost the game in 2009. So you had 2 generations of students, essentially, who'd never really been in the presence, like the real-time presence where you can walk up and ring it, of the Monon Bell. And when you bring that thing back to your campus, as we did from Crawfordsville that day, after just a crazy game, if you have 5 minutes, look at YouTube and the Monon memory of 2016, because the last plays of the game are just amazing. But when that truck pulls into town with a bell on the back of it, it literally, it's like a presidential motorcade or the Beatles arriving at JFK. It has to stop every 10 feet because people want to touch the bell. And, it's a mob scene. And, Wabash, it's funny, I think, and I joke that, they're my friends 51 weeks out of the year.
Yes.
And we have a real problem for a while. But I think they treat the bell like a Tiffany lamp in your home. I mean, you have it, and you're proud of it, and you love it, but you walk past it all the time and pay no attention to it. So when you haven't had it for a while, there's just a crazy energy, and it becomes people pour beer into it and other things. And
so it is like the Stanley Cup. Okay.
Oh, it is. Oh, yeah. And it's been dropped a few times. It's amazing that after all these years, it still clangs and it's still rock solid.
Because I was going to ask, usually when we do this show, I usually ask folks that, is this particular trophy like the Stanley Cup that anybody can touch it, anybody can do whatever they can with it, or is it only reserved for folks who have an intimate impact on the result of the game that can take it home or touch it or those kinds of things?
Well, it's probably like the Stanley Cup in that there are phases of it. You've got obviously you win the game, and then it's the players and the cheerleaders and the coaches, the people on the sideline, and then it gets off the campus and it starts making its way kind of through the masses. And then generally these days it's displayed somewhere. And unlike the days when I was in school, and of course there were dinosaurs roaming the earth back then. But
you need both, brother.
Well, back then you literally had to have somebody watch it. And I think at Wabash they may still do that. We put it on sensors and things. And so, with security cameras and technology, some of the nostalgic fun of, bell thefts has been removed. But as you probably heard, a couple of years ago, the Wabash guys tried to steal the bell. They didn't get too far. And I always applaud people that try, though, because, part of the great thing of a rivalry is the backstories. The game is the sundae, but the nuts and the whipped cream and the cherry and all that's all the backstories. And so the more we add to the legacy of the rivalry, the better it becomes.
Because heading into 100, it was 45, 45, and 9.
It was.
Which
is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, to have something that even with two schools that have this kind of a rivalry, I mean, that borders the insanity of college football.
Yes, it does. And I think for many years, DePauw and Wabash would play big schools. We used to play, once upon a time, we played Notre Dame and Michigan and IU and even Navy. So it was really hard to kind of figure out going into this game how the schools really were in terms of talent. There was one year, 1943, during World War II, that there was a guy named Bob Stuber who had been an All-American fullback at Missouri. And then he got drafted by the Chicago Bears. He played on a Sunday. On Monday, the Navy called him and said, you got to report to DePauw. And he did, because we had a naval training place there. And he got to the barracks, and they said, you play football? And he said, yeah, I played for the Bears Sunday. And he suited up, and he led the nation in scoring, in 1943. The Monon Bell game, he put up even during the season, like NBA numbers, 21 points a game or something. And he's in the College Football Hall of Fame. But I think about that today. Then he went back to the NFL. But I don't think that would fly in 2019 America.
No, the folks in Indianapolis might have something to say about that.
More than a few things, yeah.
By that, I mean the four-letter word that's in Indianapolis that a lot of folks have these days. When it comes to this particular show, I know a lot of folks will sit there and they know about rivalries when it comes to the Power 5 schools, and we get into the group of 5. And for me, part of the fun of this is going FCS, D2, D3, and AIA. For those who've never been to this game, for those who've never had to sample it, whether it's on TV, and I know it's on TV again this year, what does this game mean to Indiana, and what do you think it means to college football?
Well, I think, and I actually was at the Colts game Sunday with Dean Biasucci, who kicked in the 80s, 84 through 95, I think, in the NFL for the Colts, and then for the Rams at the end. And we were talking about how the world has changed in the last 35 years in terms of, professional sports is obviously a huge, huge business. It always was big. But Paul McGuire, who did our game for years, used to talk about kicking in the old AFL. And one week his toenail fell off. He was the punter. And he knew that if he didn't punt that week, he'd never play again. He made like $50 a week. And so he was going to go out and earn his $50 and kick. And so sports in general has gotten a lot more complicated, and there's a lot more money on the line. And even college sports, we've got talk now about likenesses and people being reimbursed for, being on the field. And I think the Monon Bell is one of those things where if you squint, you can imagine it's 1894. The game has changed. The equipment has changed. We're playing on artificial turf now. But it's still, small college football in the trenches. And I think there's something really magical about that. And, again, we live in a society where we look at the box office every weekend, and the number one movie is, presumed by some to be the best movie. And I think, we could argue that point, obviously, every week. But there's something really cool about guys who aren't playing for scholarship. There's no scholarship money in Division III for athletics. And guys who probably will never play another game if they're seniors. It's their last game ever. Wabash has the advantage of going to the playoffs this year. But, there's a lot on the line that's just about human personal pride and loyalty and tradition. And I love that.
When it comes to game day, what's the game day on campus experience like?
Well, it's a tailgating monster, and it's great because most colleges have a homecoming that is huge, and our homecoming is okay. But when we have a home Monon Bell game, homecoming is basically obliterated by this because it's just an excuse for people to come back to campus. And I used to call them Ponce de Leon moments, where you feel like you're 18 or 20 again, even though you're not. Lots of people, lots of food, lots of beverages of all sorts, and just a really great feeling. It's really small college football at a much higher level. And I get there early because I oversee the telecast every year. And it's just fun walking around. There's a real magic to it. And I think, I see people playing the ballad, watching the Monon Memories that I created years ago. And it's cool because we've got all this kind of intellectual property stuff out there. And I hate that word, intellectual property, or those two words. But,
yeah.
There's so many assets that reinforce the fact that this has been going on a long time. And it's not just another Saturday.
Time for the blatant promo. For those that want to watch / listen / keep an eye on everything, not just Monon Bell Week, but for the rest of the time when it comes to DePauw, how do they do it this weekend, and how do they do it otherwise?
Well, if they go to DePauw.edu, they can click on our athletic website, and live stats will be there. Fox Sports Indiana and Fox Sports Midwest will be carrying the game, and it'll be appearing on other Fox Sports venues around the country, so it'll truly be a national broadcast. We'll have Kevin Lee in the broadcast booth with the aforementioned Steve Hoffman, who probably embellished many things, by the way. And Brad Walker-Merkel will be the DePauw voice in the press box with Will Hampton on the sidelines. But broadcast starts at 1 o'clock Eastern, and it'll be a lot of fun. And I've actually been asked to flip the coin at the start of the game. Nice. It's going to be my last Monon Bell game as a DePauw employee. So I'm very flattered by that and honored, and I just have to practice a little bit because obviously, I've got one chance at it.
Well, aren't you going to take a coin with you that has, 2 heads or something, or do some slide of hand up the sleeve to make sure that DePauw wins the toss and can defer?
Keep it down. I'm going to a magic shop right after we get off the phone. I just have to find a good magic shop that has a legitimate-looking coin.
See, that's pretty strong. Ken Owen, special advisor to the president of DePauw, class of 1982, and designated coin flipper for this year's Monon Bell. Thanks for pulling back the curtain. This was a tremendous conversation. Have fun and just have a hell of a time.
We will, John. And thank you for the time. I really appreciate it. Go Tigers!
What he said. Battle of the Ravine with Wilkie coming up next. Rex Nelson gets to go over Battle of the Ravine here on the OSG on CFB. When it comes to trophy games and rivalries, we'll be back in 2 and 2.
The online sports guys would love to hear from you. Go to our Twitter page at OSG Sports for a comment, rant, or just whatever's on your mind about college football. Now back to college football's rivalries and trophy games.
We go to Division II, and for the 93rd time, it's the Battle of the Ravine in my home state of Arkansas, Arkadelphia to be specific. 22nd ranked Henderson State goes across Highway 67, and they literally walk across the highway to take on number 5 Ouachita Baptist, the voice of the O.B.U. Tigers. Rex Nelson is on the line, and Rex, I regret to say, as a native Arkansan, I have never attended the Battle of the Ravine, but it's on my bucket list.
Yeah, I tell all Arkansans it needs to be on their bucket list. You know, there aren't many things in American sports that you can say are truly unique, but this rivalry is truly unique because it is the only college football game in America where the visiting team, as you mentioned, does not fly to a road game, does not bus to a road game. It literally walks to a road game.
And they can dress in their own locker room.
Yeah, they dress in their own locker room. They walk across. We have a 1:05 kickoff on Saturday afternoon. Henderson's planning to walk across about 11:40 a.m. So the troopers will stop traffic on U.S. Highway 67, and the Reddies of Henderson will walk across about 11:40 on Saturday morning.
Now, the Battle of the Ravine is tied with the Black Hills Brawl between Black Hills State and South Dakota School of Mines for the longest, and we heard that we talked about that rivalry a couple of weeks ago, but they're tied with that rivalry as the longest in Division II. And Rex, the Reddies and the Tigers each have 43 wins in the series, so someone's going to gain an advantage in the series on Saturday.
Yeah, isn't it amazing that after all these decades that it's tied up 43, 43, and 6? They played back in 1895, then for some reason football went away and they didn't crank up on a regular basis to the early 1900s. And then because the pranks had gotten so wild, the series actually ended from 1951 to 1963 due to vandalism. They did not play at all, but they cranked up in 63 and pretty much have played on a regular basis since then.
Now, as I recall, Rex, you're an Arkadelphia native, correct?
I am. I grew up about a block from Ouachita Stadium. Of course, we were walking distance also from Henderson Stadium. So when I was a child, we would always walk to the game regardless of what stadium it was. But I grew up basically as a water boy on the Ouachita sideline. I was on the sideline for games from when I was old enough to walk through high school, and I've been in the press box ever since. So I'm sure I was in the stands as a baby, but I will tell you honestly, I can literally never remember being in the stands at a Ouachita football game. I've either been on the sideline or in the press box my entire life.
Well, you have a unique perspective of this Division II rivalry that goes back to the old AIC days, too. Tell me about what makes this special. What makes this rivalry so special, especially in the town of Arkadelphia?
Well, because it is in a town of only about 11,000 people. It is what I like to call the small college version of Alabama-Auburn. In other words, it's a rivalry that can really divide families. It is a rivalry that is literally in that town talked about 365 days a year. I mean, if your team wins, you can crow about it for a year. If they lose, you kind of have to keep your mouth shut for a year. And of course, if you live in Arkadelphia, you go to dinner in the same restaurants. You go to church in the same churches with all of these people. So it is a fun rivalry, and even though we use the adjective heated for it, most of the pranks these days, luckily, are pretty good-natured. And I would say, because people have to live together in a town that size, I would call it a pretty good-natured rivalry, although it's very heated once it gets on the field.
Now, what's the tailgating going to be like on game day at Cliff Harris Stadium?
Oh, there'll be plenty of it. Now we start fairly early, like I said, at 1:05. It's the national game of the week for Division III, meaning that ESPN will be streaming it over on ESPN 3. But Henderson will serve food over on its side of the highway, And so they will tailgate on their side of the highway. The Ouachita people will be on their side. And like I said, the Henderson people will cross the street for the game. So that's a good thing about the stadiums being within walking distance of each other. For a game this big, you can utilize the parking on both sides of the highway that way. So they'll be tailgating on both sides. Just choose your side.
Why do I have a feeling that there's going to be a competition between the tailgaters across the Highway 67?
There may well be. There may well be. I'm such a creature of habit. I don't ever get to enjoy any of it because I get nervous if I'm not in the press box at least 2.5 hours before the game starts. We go on the air an hour before the game starts, so I like about 90 minutes before we even go on the air. So I'll be looking out the window and watching the smoke rise and getting the good smells if nothing else. Although I must say we've got pretty good food in the Ouachita press box. We have barbecue, we have fried chicken, and we have fried catfish. I mean, how much more southern than that can you get?
Let me give some of our listeners some inside fastball here, because between two native Arkansans, catfish in Arkansas is special.
Absolutely. I am one of the founders, actually, of a group called the Arkansas Food Hall of Fame, and we name a food every year, and catfish just happens to be the food of the year for 2019 in Arkansas.
Exactly. Now, what is, during the Battle of Ravine, during the week, what is it like on the O.B.U. campus?
Well, I mean, there's just a sense of anticipation, actually, on both campuses. Just a real sense of anticipation, ready for the game to happen. One of the great traditions on the Ouachita side is they have a statue of a tiger that has been on campus since a marble statue since the 1930s, and its tail's been broken off through the years. It's been painted red through the years. So for many of the groups on campus, they take turns guarding the tiger. Is a long campus tradition. So there'll be people out there camped all night, all week, and it has been brutally cold by Arkansas standards this week, with lows even in South Arkansas in the low 20s on 2 consecutive nights. But believe me, there will be plenty of students all night out around that tiger, guarding the tiger.
We're talking with Rex Nelson, the voice of the Ouachita Baptist Tigers. Let's start talking about the game. Let's do a deep dive, because much is on the line in the Battle of the Ravine besides just bragging rights. O.B.U. has won 3 in a row over Henderson State, so the Reddies want to stop that streak. And the Great American Conference title is on the line as well. In fact, I think if O.B.U. wins it, wins the game, they can win it outright. That's kind of a big deal.
Oh, absolutely. This is one of the best combined records in the history of the series. Ouachita is 10-0 and actually has a 26-game conference winning streak. They've not lost a regular season game in more than 2 years. Henderson comes in, meanwhile, at 9-1, so you've got a combined record of 19-1. Ouachita has already clinched at least a share of its 3rd consecutive Great American Conference championship. But let me tell you, although sharing is a positive thing in most aspects of life, it is not when it comes to college football. And nobody on that Ouachita side wants to have to share that title. Harding, which is nationally ranked, is also 9-1. Ouachita beat Harding by 2 points to start the season. Harding turned around and beat Henderson by 1 point. So those 3 teams are pretty even, and should Henderson beat Ouachita, I expect that Harding will beat Arkansas Tech on Saturday, and that would lead to a 3-way tie for the conference championship.
So you're doing a deep dive now, getting ready to, as you're preparing for the broadcast, for your radio broadcast. What do you think are some keys to the game?
Well, I think it's probably going to be a fairly high-scoring game. Both offenses have been very efficient. Ouachita loves to run the football. They have, frankly, 4 very talented tailbacks on the football team, and I think that what they will do is try to get that running game going early. Try to do some time-consuming drives. Ouachita's had a lot of 8-7-minute scoring drives this year. That's what they're going to be shooting for, and that way they limit the number of possessions for Henderson, which has a really good run quarterback named Richard Stametti, and then they have a transfer that really has sparked them after a couple of mediocre years, has sparked them back to what I kind of consider the old Henderson, and that's a powerhouse. His name is Elliott Curry, and he's a transfer from Central Oklahoma. So, again, I expect that's what Ouachita will try to do, get its running game going, get some time-consuming drives, and limit the number of possessions that the Henderson offense has the football.
So it's that time of the show where you get to promote where we can hear this game or watch it and promote whatever's going on at O.B.U. So, Rex, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, one of the things that we've actually built is, and a lot of it has to do with our success, and you've got a crazy alumni, and that's me, who works hard at putting it together. But we've got one of the biggest radio networks in all of Division II. Our broadcasts are on 7 FM signals and 2 AM signals all over Arkansas, and they go into parts of Oklahoma, parts of Missouri, even a little bit of Kansas with the broadcast. So we have a wide-ranging radio network, and you can get the live stream. Usually, I'd say go to the Ouachita Athletic website, and you get the video live stream. But since it's the Division II game of the week, that now belongs to ESPN. But again, you can watch it on ESPN and all of their streaming outlets this week, since it's their national game of the week.
Sounds great. And Rex Nelson, the voice of the Ouachita Baptist Tigers, we thank you very much for your time enjoying the College Football Rivalries and Trophy Games podcast, plus educating us on the Battle of the Ravine in Arkadelphia this Saturday. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks so much, John. It's a real pleasure to visit with you about this.
Coming up, we stay in Division II. It's the Battle of the Peach Basket, as John Nelson has Valdosta State and West Georgia, so stick around. The OSG Sports app is up and running on your Android or iPhone. Install the OSG Sports app and listen to our podcast from college football, soccer, and lacrosse. What are you waiting for? Get the OSG Sports app today.
Welcome back to the OSG on CFB. It's Trophy Games and Rivalries, and one of the rivalries this week that we're looking at is Gulf South style. Division II, it is Valdosta State and West Georgia, two of the top-ranked teams at times when it comes to NCAA Division II. Hanging out with us, the voice of Valdosta State, Spencer Van Horn, friend of the network. Spencer, about time we got you on this show.
Well, man, it's glad to be here. It's pretty exciting stuff. I like the idea of this podcast with the rivalries and trophy games.
All right, so West Georgia, Valdosta State. Last time I checked, these two teams do not like each other.
No. No, not at all. It's a nice kind of brother type thing, and I guess it's the only Division II Georgia versus Georgia game. I guess they're shorter. They're in Rome, but they're struggling with their program. But nonetheless, these two have been battling it out for a long time. I think the programs are about the same age as well, so it's a nice Division II back and forth.
And when you go back to West Georgia's history, you go back to Bobby Payton national championships there, Valdosta State. It's Chris Hatcher, it's Hal Mummy, it's Kerwin Bell. It's a bunch of different iterations of Valdosta State. And when you look at this season for Valdosta State, what have you seen this year?
Oh, it's the same thing from last year. We're on a 24-game winning streak. We're looking for 25 this weekend there in Carrollton, and we're moving things right along almost the same way we did last year. I would think maybe this year the tempo might be different from what it was last year. Kerwin Bell wanted to go fast all season long, and I think we've slowed things down just a tad bit, and it's a little bit noticeable in some of the scores and some of the plays that we've run. We seem to be a little more ground-oriented with our two big running backs and then our quarterback that can run as well, and we've got a backup quarterback that runs pretty well as also. So Blazers are still moving the ball really, really well, just doing it a little differently in 2019.
How difficult is it for a team like Valdosta State to focus on being 1-0 every week, knowing that a streak is on the line, knowing that the prestige is on the line, knowing that the rankings are on the line? How have the guys stayed locked in, and how has Kerwin done that?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of good leadership on the team. From last year to this year, we were very worried, or one of the big questions was, how are we going to replace the leadership of Jeremy King, Raymond Palmer, Stuart Spence, some of those other guys that really meant a lot to the leadership of the team and kind of the players policing themselves. And this year we have Rogan Wells, we have Brian Saunz, we have Joe Mazzone, and some of the other guys as well that have sort of really taken in and absorbed the good leadership from last year and have kind of, taken on those roles here going into this year as well. Some of those young players have really grown up. We had a lot of freshmen last year. A lot of those guys are now sophomores and juniors, and it's really turned out to, I think they've all really gelled together, and a lot of that leadership is filtered over into this year from last year.
From your exposure in the past, when it comes to this particular game against West Georgia, whether it's there in Valdosta or it's in Carrollton, from talking to boosters and fans and players and former players, we know that these two teams don't get along, but what are the vibes like in the respective cities when it comes to when that other team comes to town?
The Peach Basket is almost more valued than championships, than championship trophies. There's almost a sense of this is that game, like Florida is for Florida State, or Georgia and Florida are for one another. If you have a down year but you can beat that team, that's going to make all the difference. It's going to really ease a lot of different things when it comes to anything else going on in the season. So this one's a personal one. It goes way back. The Peach Basket goes back to 2001, and I think people really they zero in on this as being one of those things that can be a season saver if the season's not going well. Both teams are doing, or at least Valdosta State's doing really well this season, so it's just one of those added bonuses to the season.
When it comes to the Peach Basket in and of itself, is it one of those Stanley Cup kind of a things where if you have participated in the win, you can touch it, and those who are fans or those who weren't intimately involved in either scoring a touchdown, clearing away, being an MVP or a coach or anything like that, you're not supposed to touch it? What is protocol, and where is the Peach Basket, by the way?
Peach Basket, the Peach Basket is wherever the team is. So Coach Gary Goff has really bought into the basket, really wants to hype it up, really wants it to be a part of the team. There was a low there. Chris Hatcher started it in 2001, and the basket kind of took a bit of a hiatus for a little while under some other coaches. David Dean wanted to bring it back, and now Kerwin Bell and then now head coach Gary Goff have really embraced it as well. So it's wherever the team is. It's out at practice. It's going to have a seat on the bus when we go up to Carrollton, and it's going to be at dinner, breakfast, lunch, breakfast, and dinner, and all those different things. It'll be at the stadium as well. But if there are protocols on who's allowed to touch it, I hope that the play-by-play guy's allowed to touch it, because I got a chance to take a picture with it last year. So I don't think there's any protocol on who can or can't touch, as long as it's obviously as long as the victoring team is in possession.
When you look at NCAA Division II, and I know that a lot of folks who listen to our programming are Division I, 1AA folks. What makes Division II football so special in your mind?
Little things like this are just as important as they are at Texas and Oklahoma. And this kind of goes to just thinking about a lot of those small rivalries. It's all just, Tallahassee's a small town. Gainesville's kind of a small town. Athens is kind of a small town. Valdosta and Carrollton, kind of small towns, just the same. And so I think one of the things that makes it great is that this is really close to home to everybody. We went to school here. I'm a VSU grad. I know the guys that are on the team now. I know from last year, and I know them from this year. And I think that's something that what makes Division II football really, really special. And it filters from Division I down in Division II. But I think sometimes when you get these smaller towns together, because Valdosta's certainly smaller than maybe Norman, Oklahoma, or Austin, Texas. So you still get a much more intimate vibe when it comes to the relationship with the university, and then when it comes to the relationship with the rivalry, and then the trophy that goes along with that rivalry.
Now, as the resident foodie on the show, I always like to ask about the tailgating experience. So on a Saturday in Valdosta, knowing full well that the game is in Carrollton this year, but on a tailgate Saturday, what is the tailgate experience like at VSU?
Oh man, we've got bullhorns. There's a gentleman and I'm not even sure you call it a bullhorn, but it's one of those big old horns that goes off every few minutes. We've got tailgating right in front of the main gate with a lot of the boosters. There's the president, there's the alumni, everybody's going on, and then kind of on as you wrap around the stadium, it's almost a continuing thing that just goes all the way around, and then the students are on the other side and the teams get to walk through. In terms of food, it's always different. It always seems to be of course it's South Georgia, so there's plenty of barbecue and hamburgers and hot dogs and things. But, the tailgating experience wraps all the way around, and then the Blazer walk starts out by the students, and then it comes around. They almost walk all the way around the stadium as well before they walk into and then down to the locker room. So, the atmosphere is pretty special. It's loud, with the bullhorns and with the bands and, everybody hooping and hollering. I don't get a chance to eat much during before the ball game happens, because I'm not one I can't eat and then broadcast it.
Right there with you.
It would be a belching disaster, so I have to stay away from the food.
And I know that one of the traditions for Valdosta High is banging the helmets on the tin to create a din of noise. Is that a part of it too?
Yeah, there's some of that. I had the headset off one time, just maybe getting a drink of water or something, and I heard that stuff going on. We've also got a gentleman that has 4 gigantic balloons or inflatable championship rings. So he carries those championship rings around with him. We also have like a junior Blazer run that lead the actual team out of the inflatable Valdosta State logo. So once the video plays, the junior Blazers all run out with the cheerleaders, and then the Blazers follow behind that. Those rings are also incorporated in that, as some students get to come down and kind of almost like an inner tube, put the ring on and run out with the Blazers and the ring. So it's a really cool environment.
Battle for the Peach Basket this weekend. Time for the blatant promo, Spencer. For those that want to keep a listen and keep an eye on what's going on with this game and everything VSU all season long, regardless of sport, how do they do it?
Yeah, vstateblazers.com is the best place to go to keep up with the football team, to go and keep up with our 2 really good basketball teams, baseball and softball, volleyball. Everybody is at vstateblazers.com. That's a great place to go and keep up with everybody. And then listening to the game this weekend, on the Blazers side of things, talk921.com is where you can go to listen to the ball game.
Spencer Van Horn, play-by-play voice of the Valdosta State Blazers. Thanks for hanging out with us here on the OSG on CFB and breaking down the Battle of the Peach Basket. We know we'll be paying attention to it, and have a good call, my friend.
Yes, sir, we'll do it. Thank you so much.
When we come back, Trophy Games and Rivalries continue. You're listening to the OSG on CFB. We'll be back in 2 and 2.
The OSG app is up and running on your Android or iPhone. Install the OSG app and listen to our podcast from college football, soccer, and lacrosse. What are you waiting for? Download the OSG app today.
Other rivalries and trophy games in college football this weekend. Number 7 Minnesota heads to Niall Kinnick Stadium to take on the Iowa Hawkeyes. The winner takes home the Floyd of Rosedale Trophy, and that's an interesting story. It came about as a result of a bet between the governors of the 2 states back in 1935, and that involved a live pig. The trophy is a bronze pig. The trophy is currently possessed by Iowa. Minnesota holds a 42-40-2 advantage in the series with the Florida Rosedale on the line. Iowa's won 14 of the last 18 meetings. Out west, Air Force and Colorado State will play for possession of the Ram Falcon Trophy. That trophy has been housed at the Air Force Academy the last 3 years. In Ann Arbor, Michigan, the Paul Bunyan Trophy is on the line when Michigan State takes on number 14 Michigan. The 4-foot wooden statue was donated by then-Governor G. Minnan Williams to mark Michigan State's acceptance into the Big Ten back in 1953. In the FCS, Southern and Jackson State play in the Boombox Classic. Valparaiso and Butler meet for the Hoosier Helmet. And Southern Utah hosts Northern Arizona for possession of the Hinton-Burdick Grand Canyon Trophy. In Division II, Missouri Southern and Pittsburgh State will play for the Miners Helmet and Axe in a game known as the Miners Bowl. And a whole bunch of rivalry and trophy games in Division III. It's the Academic Bowl, Case Western Reserve and Carnegie Mellon, the Cortiga Jug between SUNY Cortland and Ithaca, the Dutchman Shoes between RPI and Union in upstate New York, and the Maryland Railroad Lantern is on the line when Johns Hopkins and McDaniel get it on. Those are your college football rivalries and trophy games this weekend. We thank Bill Shanks, Jason Turner, Rex Nelson, Steve Hoffman, Ken Owen, and Spencer Van Horn for joining the show this week. For John Nelson, I'm John Wilkerson. Enjoy the games this weekend.
You can find this and past shows by downloading the OSG Sports app on your mobile device. Enjoy all of our shows from the OSG Sports Podcasting Network. The OSG Sports app is up and running. Download it today.